The transport shuttle hummed as it approached the Galactic Research Station, a massive structure floating in the darkness of space. Inside, Lee pressed his face against the window, watching the station grow larger. He had traveled for 3 weeks to get here, leaving behind his quiet life on the colony world of New Haven. This was supposed to be the opportunity of a lifetime, a chance to study alien creatures nobody had ever seen before. Was 28 years old, with dark hair that always seemed messy no matter how much he tried to fix it. He wore a simple gray research uniform that was still too stiff and new. In his bag, he carried his personal research notes, photos of animals he had helped back home, and a worn book about animal behavior his grandmother had given him when he was 12. The docking process took another 20 minutes. When finally stepped onto the station, a woman was waiting for him. She was tall and professional, with sharp eyes that seemed to measure everything around her. "Lee," she asked, extending her hand. "I'm Dr. Hay, head of the Xenobiology department. Welcome to Research Station." Shook her hand and smiled nervously. "Thank you for accepting my transfer request, Doctor." Hay's expression softened just a little. "Your work with traumatized animals impressed me. We need people who think differently here." She paused, then added more quietly, "especially now." Before could ask what she meant, an alarm blared through the corridor. Red lights flashed along the walls. Hay's hand went to her communication device immediately. "What is it?" she demanded. A rough voice crackled through. "The cub again. It destroyed another feeding mechanism. That's the 4th one this month." Hay closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them again, she looked tired. "Seal the containment sector. I'll be there soon." She turned to, "Come with me. You might as well see what you're dealing with right away." As they walked through the winding corridors of the station, Hay explained the situation. 3 months ago, a juvenile creature was captured from the planet below, a world called Prime. The species was called Apex, and even the young ones were incredibly dangerous. The coalition wanted to study them, to understand them, maybe even to find a way to communicate with them peacefully. But nothing had worked. The creature they called the Cub had attacked every researcher who tried to approach it. 17 people had been injured. 3 containment units had been torn apart. The Cub refused to eat properly and seemed to be getting sicker every day. Now, the coalition was talking about putting it down, ending the experiment before anyone else got hurt. "We tried everything," Hay said as they rode an elevator down to the lower levels. "They are telepathic, so they tried to soothe its mind. The Cub nearly killed their lead researcher. They used harmonic frequencies that work on every species they've ever met. The Cub smashed their equipment. They tried pheromones that could calm a raging bull. The Cub didn't even notice." "What about humans?" asked. "What did we try?" Hay looked at him with something like sadness. "We tried keeping our distance. We tried being firm. We tried food rewards. Nothing worked. The Cub just became more aggressive, more stressed. Its bioluminescent patterns show extreme distress at all times now." The elevator doors opened to reveal a checkpoint guarded by a large reptilian creature in security armor. He was at least 7 feet tall, with green scales and yellow eyes that tracked their every movement. "This is our head of security," Hay said. "This is Lee, our new." Studied with those unblinking yellow eyes. Another human, good luck lasting longer than the others. His voice sounded like gravel being crushed. "Thank you," said politely, even though he wasn't sure if meant it as encouragement or a warning. Past the checkpoint, they entered a long corridor with reinforced walls. At the end was a massive window made of transparent aluminum, strong enough to withstand explosions. Through it, could see the containment chamber. And inside the chamber was the Cub. His breath caught in his throat. The creature was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. It stood about 6 feet tall at the shoulder, with 6 powerful limbs ending in curved claws. Its body was covered in scales that looked like polished black stone, and running along its spine were patterns that glowed with a soft blue light. The light pulsed rapidly, like a racing heartbeat. The cub was packing back and forth, never stopping. Its head swung from side to side with each step. Every few moments it would pause and scratch at its own body with desperate intensity, then continue packing. Through the thick glass could hear a sound, low and mournful, like a whale singing in the deep ocean. "How old is it?" asked softly. "We estimate 6 to 8 months," Hay replied. "Equivalent to a human toddler developmentally. Adults can grow up to 15 feet tall." Watched the cub carefully. He noticed how it favored its left rear limb, putting less weight on it. He saw the way it scratched the same spots on its body over and over. He observed how its glowing patterns flared brighter whenever certain sounds came through the station's speakers. "It's in pain," said. Hay looked at him sharply. "What?" "Look at the way it moves. That's not just aggression. Something is wrong with its leg and it's scratching because something on its skin bothers it. And watch, every time the station's ambient sound system cycles through certain frequencies, it reacts." Hay stared at the cub with new eyes, then back at. Everyone else said it was just naturally violent. "Maybe it is violent," admitted. "But maybe it's also hurt and scared and trapped in a place that feels wrong to it. Imagine being taken from your home as a child, locked in a box, and having strange creatures constantly trying to touch you with things you don't understand." They stood in silence for a while, watching the cub pace. Finally, Hay spoke. "The coalition is sending representatives in 3 days. If we can't show significant progress by then, they'll authorize. What would you do?" Didn't hesitate. "I need 24 hours alone with it." Hay's eyes widened. "That's insane, it will kill you." "I won't go inside the containment chamber," explained. "I'll stay in the observation room where I'm safe, but everyone else needs to stay away. No interruptions, no attempts to help, no checking on me. Just 24 hours. "Why?" Turned to look at her. "Because every species that tried to help the cub did it their way. They used telepathy because that's what works for them. They used harmonics because that's their language. But nobody asked what the cub needs. Nobody tried to understand it on its own terms." "And you think you can?" "I think humans are good at one thing nobody gives us credit for," said. "We're good at watching and waiting and learning. We're patient. Give me 24 hours. Hay looked at the cub, then back at the cub. Finally, she nodded. 24 hours, but if anything goes wrong, security pulls you out immediately. Understood?" "Understood." As they left the containment sector, looked back one more time. The cub had stopped packing and was staring directly at him through the glass. For just a moment, their eyes met. Then the creature turned away and resumed its endless, desperate walking. Made a silent promise. He would understand. He would help. He had 24 hours to do what everyone else thought was impossible. Entered the observation room at exactly 6 in the morning, station time. The room was small and bare, with only a bench, a water dispenser, and a console that showed the cub's vital signs. One wall was the transparent aluminum window that looked into the containment chamber. On the other side, the cub was still packing. He had spent the previous evening reading every report, every note, every failed attempt to connect with the creature. Now he set all of that aside. Reports could tell him what others had tried. They couldn't tell him what the cub needed. Sat down on the floor near the window, cross-legged and relaxed. He made sure the cub could see him clearly. Then he did nothing. Hours passed. The cub paced, watched. He didn't try to make contact. He didn't speak. He didn't move suddenly. He just observed, his presence calm and steady. At hour 3, Hay's voice came through the intercom. "Are you all right? The readings show nothing is happening." "That's the point," replied softly. "Please, no more interruptions." The intercom went silent. Continued watching. He noticed patterns that the reports had missed. The cub always turned left when it reached the wall, never right. It scratched its left side more than its right. When it made that mournful sound, Its bioluminescent patterns changed from rapid pulsing to slow waves. The scratching on its body had created raw spots, places where the scales looked damaged. At hour 5, pulled out a nutrition bar and ate slowly. The cub paused in its packing to watch him, didn't look directly at the creature. Direct eye contact was a challenge for many predators on Earth. Maybe it was the same here. At hour 8, something changed. Had been reviewing the environmental data on his portable tablet. He noticed that the station's lighting followed a standard 24-hour cycle, but Prime had 18-hour days according to the planetary survey. The cub's internal clock was constantly out of sync with its surroundings. No wonder it seemed stressed. He also noticed that the ambient sound system played frequencies designed to be soothing for most species, but the report said hearing was sensitive in a different range. What sounded pleasant to others might be painful to the cub. Made notes, real notes this time, not guesses. At hour 10, his legs were stiff from sitting. He stood up slowly and stretched. The cub immediately backed away from the window, its patterns flaring bright, moved in slow motion, showing he wasn't a threat. After a moment, the cub relaxed slightly and returned to packing. At hour 12, began to hum. It wasn't a song. It was just a low, rhythmic sound that matched the frequency of the cub's mournful calls. He kept it quiet, barely audible, just something to fill the silence. He didn't look at the cub while he did it. The packing slowed, not much but enough to notice. Kept humming, the same low tone, over and over. It reminded him of his grandmother, who used to hum while she worked with injured animals on their farm. She always said that animals could sense intention. If you meant them no harm, if you were patient and kind, they would eventually understand. At hour 14, the cub stopped packing entirely. It stood in the center of the containment chamber, head tilted, listening to his humming. The bioluminescent patterns along its spine shifted to a different rhythm, slower and less frantic. His throat was getting sore, but he didn't stop. This was the first real response they'd gotten from the cub in 3 months. He couldn't waste it. At hour 16, something remarkable happened. The cub moved toward the window, not in an aggressive way, but cautiously, curiously. It came to within 5 feet of the glass and sat down on its haunches. Its 6 limbs folded beneath it in a position that looked almost comfortable. Kept humming. He still didn't make eye contact, keeping his gaze soft and unfocused. In his peripheral vision, he could see the cub watching him intently. Outside the observation room, a crowd had gathered. Researchers pressed against the outer windows, watching in silence. Stood with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Hay had her hands pressed against the glass, hardly daring to breathe. At hour 18's voice finally gave out. He stopped humming and simply sat in silence. The cub made a small sound, almost like a question, waited a moment, then began humming again, softer this time. The cub's eyes half closed. The tension in its body eased. For the first time since its capture, the creature looked almost peaceful. At hour 20, noticed something important. The station's lighting was shifting toward its night cycle, but the cub was becoming more active, not less. On Prime, with its 18-hour day, the timing would be different. The cub was being forced to sleep when it should be awake and stay awake when it should sleep. He made a note on his tablet, his humming never stopping. Environmental modifications would be essential. At hour 22, was exhausted. His back ached from sitting on the floor. His throat was raw. His eyes burned with tiredness. But the cub had settled down completely, lying on its belly with its head resting on its front limbs. Its patterns glowed with a soft, steady light that looked nothing like the frantic pulsing from before. At hour 24, Hay's voice came through the intercom again, gentle this time. "It's been 24 hours. You need to come out." Stood up slowly, every muscle protesting. The cub's eyes opened, tracking his movement. For a moment, worried it would become agitated again. Instead, the creature made a sound, softer than before, almost gentle. placed his palm flat against the glass. The cub watched this gesture with what looked like curiosity. "I'll come back," said quietly. "I promise." He left the observation room on unsteady legs. Outside, the corridor was packed with researchers from every species. They stared at him like he had just performed magic. Hay grabbed his arm to steady him. "What did you do?" "I stopped trying to fix it," said, his voice hoarse from all the humming. "I just tried to understand it." She led him to a medical bay where Wu, a young human medical specialist, was waiting to check him over. Wu had kind eyes and quick hands. She scanned him with various instruments, making sure he wasn't injured or suffering from exhaustion toxicity. "You're dehydrated and your vocal cords are strained," she said, handing him a water bottle. "But otherwise fine. That was either very brave or very stupid." "Maybe both," admitted, drinking deeply. Hay pulled up a chair. "Tell me what you learned." Explained his observations. The environmental issues, the lighting cycles, the sound frequencies, the signs of physical pain. He talked about the parasites he suspected were under the cub's scales, causing the constant scratching. He mentioned the possible injury to its rear limb that made it limp. "The cub isn't inherently aggressive," concluded. "It's hurt, stressed, and living in an environment that feels completely wrong. Imagine being in constant pain, unable to sleep properly, with sounds that hurt your ears, and strange creatures constantly trying to do things to you that you don't understand. You'd be aggressive too." Hay was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Finally, she nodded. "What do you need?" "Permission to modify the containment environment," said immediately. "Change the lighting cycle to match Prime's day-night pattern. Adjust the ambient sound frequencies. Add proper substrate so it can burrow, which is apparently a natural behavior for young apex predators according to the survey data. And I need to treat those parasites." "That last one will require getting close to it," Wu pointed out. "Very close." "I know," said, "but I think it will let me. It's starting to understand that I'm not a threat." Entered the medical bay, his heavy footsteps announcing his arrival. "The coalition representatives arrive in 48 hours. Can you have results by then?" Looked at Hay, then at, "Give me 3 days total. If I can't show significant improvement by then, I'll step aside." Studied him with those unblinking yellow eyes. Then, surprisingly, he nodded. 3 days, but if that creature tries to kill you, I will not feel guilty about putting it down to save your life." "Fair enough," agreed. As the others left to begin preparing the environmental modifications, lay back on the medical bed. His body screamed for rest, but his mind was racing. The cub had responded to him. It had calmed down. It had shown trust. Now he just had to figure out how to build on that trust before time ran out. The transformation of the containment chamber took 6 hours. Engineering teams worked quickly under Hay's supervision, installing new lighting systems that matched Prime's 18-hour cycle. They replaced the smooth metal floor with substrate material that could be dug into and shaped. They recalibrated every sound system in the sector to avoid frequencies that might cause discomfort. The cub watched all of this activity with suspicion at first, but when returned to the observation room and began his humming again, the creature relaxed. It seemed to understand now that its presence meant no harm would come. When the modifications were complete, the change in the cub's behavior was immediate and dramatic. The lighting felt right for the first time since its capture. The substrate allowed it to dig shallow burrows, a comfort behavior that helped it feel secure. Without the painful sound frequencies, its pattern stopped flashing with distress. Within 12 hours, the cub had eaten a full meal for the first time in weeks. The monitoring systems showed its stress hormones dropping to normal levels. Researchers who had doubted its approach now stood in quiet amazement, watching the data streams update in real time. But there was still the matter of the parasites and the injured limb. Those required direct treatment, which meant would have to enter the containment chamber. "Absolutely not," said flatly when suggested it. They were standing in Hayes' office, reviewing the plan. "That creature could tear you apart in seconds." "It could have attacked me through the observation window dozens of times when I was sitting close to the glass," countered. "It didn't. It's learning to trust me." Wu, who had been reviewing the medical scans, spoke up quietly. "The parasites are getting worse. If we don't treat them soon, they could cause serious infection, and that limb needs to be examined properly. The longer we wait, the worse it gets." Hay rubbed her temples, clearly torn. "What's your plan?" "I spend another day building trust," explained. "I introduce the cub to the medical equipment slowly, let it see and smell everything I'll be using. Then I enter with Wu. Two humans working together might feel less threatening than one, especially if the cub sees us cooperating peacefully." "Why me?" Wu asked, her voice wavering slightly. "Because you're calm and you move carefully," said. "The cub will sense that. Also, you're smaller than most of the male researchers. You're less physically intimidating." Wu took a deep breath. "Okay, I'll do it, but we need proper safety protocols." Insisted on full security presence. Armed guards would be positioned outside the containment chamber, ready to intervene if anything went wrong. Emergency medical teams would stand by. Every moment would be recorded and analyzed. The next day began the conditioning process. He brought various items to the observation window: medical scanners, the treatment applicators, bandaging materials. He let the cub see each item, holding them up slowly, showing they weren't weapons. Sometimes he'd use the items on himself first, demonstrating they caused no harm. The cub watched with intense curiosity. Its head tilted from side to side as it studied each new object. Once, when held up the medical scanner and passed it over his own arm, the cub moved closer to the glass, its bioluminescent patterns brightening with what looked like interest. That night barely slept. He kept thinking about all the ways this could go wrong. The cub was still a powerful predator. If it felt threatened or cornered, if he made one wrong move, people could die. But he also thought about the creature lying in pain, suffering needlessly because everyone was too afraid to help it properly. The next morning, and Wu suited up in light protective gear. Not the heavy armor that might seem threatening, but simple padding that could prevent minor scratches. They carried their medical supplies in transparent containers so the cub could see everything clearly. Hay met them at the containment chamber entrance. Her face was pale. "You don't have to do this. We can wait for specialized equipment or—" "We've been waiting for 3 months," interrupted gently. "That's long enough." The door to the containment chamber was a massive airlock designed to prevent escapes. As it cycled open, could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. Beside him, Wu's breathing was fast and shallow. "Remember," whispered to her, "move slowly. No sudden gestures. Keep your voice soft. If the cub approaches you, don't back away suddenly. Stand your ground but stay relaxed." "Easy for you to say," Wu muttered, but she smiled weakly to show she was trying to stay calm. The inner door opened. They stepped into the containment chamber. The cub was on the far side of the space, partially hidden in one of its burrows. When it saw them enter, its entire body tensed. The bioluminescent patterns flared bright, a warning sign. A low rumble came from its throat, not quite a growl but close. Immediately sat down on the floor, making himself small and non-threatening. Wu, following his lead, did the same. They placed their medical supplies between them, visible and unthreatening. For long minutes, nothing happened. The cub stayed in its burrow, watching them. Began his humming, that same low, rhythmic sound that had worked before. He could feel the weight of 100 eyes watching through the observation windows, researchers and security personnel holding their breath. Slowly the cub emerged from its burrow. It moved with caution, each step deliberate. Its eyes never left Wu. When it reached the center of the chamber, it stopped and sat down, mirroring their posture. Extended his hand slowly, palm down, fingers relaxed. It was the least threatening gesture he could make, an invitation without demand. The cub tilted its head, studying the hand. Then, moving with surprising delicacy for such a large creature, it leaned forward. Its snout came close to his hand, sniffing carefully. Held perfectly still, barely breathing. The cub's nose touched his palm. Its breath was warm and smelled faintly of the meat it had eaten earlier. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Then the cub pressed its massive head against his hand, the same way a cat might seek affection from its owner. Behind the observation glass, someone gasped audibly. Gently moved his hand, scratching the spot just behind where the cub's equivalent of ears would be. The creature's eyes half closed. Its bioluminescent patterns shifted to a slow, peaceful pulse. And then, impossibly, it made a sound, a deep, rumbling vibration that came from its chest. It was purring. Wu's eyes were wide with wonder. She whispered, "It's actually purring." "I know," whispered back, his voice full of awe. "Let's work quickly while it's calm." Moving with careful precision, they began their examination. Kept one hand on the cub's head, maintaining that comforting contact, while Wu ran the medical scanner along its body. The cub tensed slightly but didn't pull away. The scanner revealed what they had suspected. Parasites had burrowed under the scales along the cub's left side and back. The injured limb had a hairline fracture that was healing poorly. Both conditions were painful but treatable. Wu prepared the applicator, a device that would inject medicine under the scales. She showed it to the cub first, letting the creature see and smell it. Then, with hands still providing comfort, she applied the treatment. The cub flinched at the first injection but didn't attack. Increased his scratching, humming louder to provide distraction. The creature's purring continued, though it sounded a bit uncertain now. "You're doing so well," murmured. "Such a brave one, almost done." Treatment by treatment, injection by injection, they worked their way across the affected areas. The cub remained calm, trusting them even though the process clearly caused some discomfort. When Wu finished with the parasites, she carefully examined the fractured limb. "It's healing wrong," she said quietly. "I need to set it properly, which means manipulating it. This is going to hurt." Nodded, he moved closer to the cub, using both hands now to provide comfort. "Listen to me," he said to the creature, his voice low and soothing. "This is going to hurt, but only for a moment. We're helping you, trust me." The cub looked at him with eyes that seemed almost understanding. Then it lay down fully, extending the injured limb toward Wu in what looked like permission. Wu worked quickly but carefully. When she manipulated the fracture, the cub cried out, a sharp sound of pain that made everyone outside the chamber jump. But it didn't attack. It pressed its head harder against hands, seeking comfort, and endured. When Wu finished applying the stabilizing wrap, the cub was shaking slightly. Wrapped his arms around the massive head, holding the creature gently. The cub leaned into him, its purring returning, softer and somehow more trusting than before. They stayed like that for several minutes, human and alien, predator and prey, finding comfort in each other. Outside the chamber, hardened security officers wiped their eyes. Scientists who had spent their entire careers studying alien life stood in stunned silence. When and Wu finally exited the containment chamber, the cub watched them go with what looked like sadness. But it was a clean, healthy, properly cared for sadness. The creature settled into its burrow, the bioluminescent patterns along its spine glowing with peaceful contentment. Approached, his expression unreadable. Then slowly he extended his clawed hand. "I was wrong about you, human." Shook the offered hand. "You were just trying to keep people safe. That's your job." Still said, "What you did in there, I have never seen anything like it." None of them had, and news of what happened in that containment chamber was about to spread across the entire galaxy. The recording of treating the cub spread through the coalition's networks like wildfire. Within 24 hours, every major scientific institution in known space had requested copies. News outlets across 100 worlds ran stories about the human who had tamed the untamable. Research stations everywhere began reviewing their own protocols for handling aggressive specimens. The coalition representatives arrived ahead of schedule, their ships dropping out of faster-than-light travel with unusual haste. Admiral led the delegation, a towering figure from a warrior species called the. He had gray skin like stone, 4 arms and eyes that held no warmth whatsoever. Behind him came a dozen other officials, scientists, and military observers from various coalition worlds. Hay met them in the station's main conference room, stood beside her, wearing his best uniform and trying not to look nervous. Wu was there too, along with and several senior researchers from different species. Admiral wasted no time on pleasantries. Show us the creature. They led the delegation to the observation area. The cub was visible through the reinforced glass, resting comfortably in its burrow. Its scales looked healthier now, the raw patches healing. The injured limb was properly wrapped, and the creature bore its weight normally for the first time in months. When it saw approach the window, its bioluminescent patterns brightened, and it moved toward him eagerly. Placed his hand against the glass. On the other side, the cub pressed its head against the same spot, as close as it could get to making contact. Impossible, one of the coalition scientists muttered. The medical report said this creature was extremely aggressive. It was, Hay confirmed, until we stopped approaching it with assumptions and started listening to what it needed. Admiral's expression remained hard. One success does not prove a methodology. I could train a war hound through pain and dominance. That does not make the method ethical or replicable. Didn't use pain or dominance, Wu spoke up, her voice stronger than usual. He used patience and empathy. Those can be taught. Can they? Admiral challenged. Or is this simply an unusual talent this particular human possesses? Before anyone could answer, a young woman pushed through the crowd of observers. She was human, perhaps 25 years old, with short black hair and determined eyes. Her name badge read, Junior Researcher. Admiral, if I may speak, asked. Admiral looked annoyed but nodded, briefly. I've been working with 3 other specimens that were classified as uncooperative, explained quickly. After watching's approach with the cub, I tried similar methods, environmental modifications, patient observation, and non-threatening presence. All 3 specimens have shown remarkable improvement in the past 48 hours. She pulled up data on a portable screen. Graphs showed stress hormones dropping, aggressive incidence decreasing, feeding behaviors normalizing. The evidence was clear and documented. These are preliminary results, Admiral said, but his tone had shifted slightly, less dismissive now. They prove nothing definitive. Then let me prove it definitively, said. Every eye in the room turned to him. Let me demonstrate the full extent of what's possible. What are you proposing? Hay asked, concern in her voice. A live demonstration. I'll enter the cub's containment chamber with no protective gear, no weapons, no precautions. If the human approach truly works, the cub will accept my presence peacefully. If it doesn't, well, you'll have your answer too. That's suicide, growled. I won't allow it. It's necessary, insisted. Admiral is right to be skeptical. Words and recordings can be faked or misinterpreted. But if I can show, here and now, that a human can coexist peacefully with one of the galaxy's most dangerous predators, it changes everything. Admiral studied with his cold eyes. You would risk your life for this. I would, said simply, because I believe in it. A long silence filled the conference room. Finally, Admiral nodded. Very well, show us what humans can do. 20 minutes later, stood before the containment chamber entrance. He had changed out of his uniform into simple clothes, nothing that might seem threatening or unusual. He carried nothing, his hands empty and open. Behind the observation glass, dozens of faces watched with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Hay gripped his shoulder. You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do," said. "Not just for the cub, but for all the other creatures like it. For all the future first contacts where understanding might make the difference between peace and violence." The airlock cycled open, stepped through. The cub had been resting, but it stood as soon as it sensed someone entering. For a moment, felt a spike of fear. The creature was so much larger up close, so clearly powerful and dangerous. One swipe of those claws could end his life. Then the cub's patterns shifted to a brighter, happier color. It made a sound, almost like a greeting, and bounded toward him with the enthusiasm of an excited puppy. At the last moment braced himself, unsure if he was about to be attacked or embraced. The cub crashed into him, but gently, carefully, pressing its massive head against his chest. The impact made stumble back a step, but strong forelimbs wrapped around him, supporting him. The creature's purring filled the chamber, so deep and powerful that could feel it vibrating through his bones. "Hey there," said softly, wrapping his arms around the cub's neck. "I missed you too." They stayed like that for a long moment, human and alien, sharing warmth and trust. Then began to walk around the chamber, and the cub followed like a shadow. He sat down, and the cub lay beside him, head in his lap. He stood up, and the cub stood too, matching his movements with playful energy. At one point, threw a piece of substrate material across the chamber. The cub chased it, caught it in its mouth, and brought it back to him, dropping it at his feet with obvious expectation. Threw it again, and again the cub retrieved it, making happy sounds the entire time. Behind the glass, the observers stood in stunned silence. Admiral's expression had transformed from skepticism to something approaching wonder. Coalition officials whispered to each other frantically, already planning how to incorporate these findings into existing protocols. But then something went wrong. One of Admiral's security officers, a heavily armed member of the military, moved too close to the glass. His armor's power systems created a high-pitched whine, a frequency that the cub's sensitive hearing found painful. The creature's patterns flashed bright red in distress. "Turn off that armor now," barked, but it was too late. The cub spun toward the sound, its body tensing for attack. Its lips pulled back, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. The playful creature vanished, replaced by the apex predator it truly was. Inside the chamber could feel the shift in mood. His heart hammered, but he kept his voice calm. "Hey, look at me, look at me." The cub's attention snapped back to him, torn between the painful sound and the trusted presence. Its patterns flickered between aggressive red and the calmer colors had come to recognize. Stepped between the cub and the window, placing himself in the creature's line of sight. He knelt down slowly, making himself vulnerable, showing trust. "It's okay," he said softly. "I know it hurts, but you're safe. I won't let anyone harm you." The cub's patterns flickered once more, then settled into a color hadn't seen before, a soft purple that seemed to indicate uncertainty. The creature looked at the threatening presence beyond the glass, then back again. Then deliberately the cub stepped in front of. It positioned its body between him and the window, head lowered in a protective stance. The message was clear. If anyone wanted to hurt, they would have to go through the cub first. His breath caught. The creature wasn't just accepting his presence, it was protecting him. Bonding went both ways. Outside, Admiral had gone very still. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight it hadn't before. "Turn off that armor." Everyone stepped back from the glass. The security officer immediately. As the painful sound ceased, the cub relaxed, though it remained positioned protectively near. After a moment, it turned and pressed against him, seeking reassurance. Wrapped his arms around the massive head once more. "Good job," he murmured. "You protected me, thank you." When finally exited the containment chamber, the atmosphere had completely changed. Admiral approached him directly, and to everyone's surprise, he placed one of his 4 hands over his heart in a gesture of respect. "I came here to shut down this project," the Admiral said. I believed the species was too dangerous for peaceful study. I was wrong. He looked at the cub through the glass, then back at. What you have demonstrated today changes everything we thought we knew about communication. It's not just me, said. It's the human approach. Patience, empathy, observation. These are things that can be taught. A coalition scientist, an elderly being with tentacles instead of arms, spoke up. But there is a problem. The cub must be returned to prime within the week. Coalition regulations require that captured juveniles be released before full maturity. But the creature has bonded with you. Separation could undo all this progress. Then I'll go with it, said without hesitation. I'll help reintegrate the cub with its own kind. Hay stepped forward. I'm going too. This is too important to trust to a single person. We'll need a full research team. Count me in, Wu said. And me, added. Crossed his arms. Someone needs to keep these crazy humans alive. I volunteer for security detail. Admiral looked at the group of volunteers, then nodded slowly. Very well, prepare an expedition to Prime. You leave in 3 days. He paused, then added, the galaxy is watching, humans. Show us what else you can do. The transport ship descended through Prime's atmosphere, cutting through clouds that glowed with strange colors from the planet's unique atmospheric composition. Stood in the observation deck with his hand pressed against the window, watching the alien landscape emerge below. Massive forests of crystalline trees stretched to the horizon, their trunks catching the light of the planet's twin suns. Beside him, the cub pressed against the glass, its bioluminescent patterns pulsing with what it learned to recognize as excitement. The creature hadn't seen its home world in months, and now it was returning. Are you nervous? Hay asked, coming to stand beside. Terrified, admitted. We're about to meet adult apex creatures in their natural environment. Everything we've learned is from studying one juvenile in captivity. We don't really know how they'll react to us. But you have a theory, Wu said. She was checking medical equipment for the dozenth time, her own way of dealing with nervousness. The cub's behavior suggests that apex creatures are social, said. The way it responds to affection, the way it seeks comfort, the protective instincts we've seen. These aren't traits of a solitary predator. I think they live in family groups, maybe even packs. Which means the cub's family has been looking for it, added. She had joined the expedition as an assistant researcher, eager to learn more about human methods of communication. Entered the observation deck fully armed and armored. Landing in 15 minutes. Remember the protocol. We stay together, we move slowly, and at the first sign of real danger, we retreat to the ship. No heroics. They landed in a clearing near where the cub had originally been captured. The planetary survey had identified this area as part of a larger territory that showed signs of apex activity. As the ship's ramp lowered, the cub became more agitated, making high-pitched sounds that echoed through the cargo bay. It's calling for its family, realized. Then let's hope they answer, Hay said. They stepped out onto the surface of Prime. The air was thick and humid, filled with strange scents. The crystalline trees hummed softly, responding to the wind with musical tones. In the distance, something roared, a sound so deep and powerful that felt it in his chest. The cub bounded down the ramp, its movements more energetic than had ever seen. It ran in circles around the clearing, calling out repeatedly. Then it stopped, head tilted, listening. An answer came from the forest, not one voice but several. Here we go, muttered, raising his weapon to a ready position. 3 shapes emerged from between the crystalline trees. Adult apex creatures, each one at least 15 feet tall, covered in scales that looked like polished obsidian. Their bioluminescent patterns glowed with complex colors that shifted and changed in what realized was probably a form of communication. The cub ran toward them, calling out joyfully. The largest adult, presumably a parent, lowered its massive head to inspect the young one. For several moments, The adults examined the cub, their patterns flashing through different colors, wished desperately that he could understand what they were saying to each other. Then all three adult heads turned to look at the research team. "Nobody move," said quietly. "Let them come to us if they want to, we don't approach." The largest adult took a step forward, then another. It was moving with predatory precision, every muscle coiled and ready. Its eyes, large and intelligent, studied each member of the research team in turn. "Warned, I don't like this." "Hold," replied, "just hold." The adult came within 20 feet of them and stopped. Its patterns were flashing rapidly now, what looked like agitation or confusion. Behind it, the cub was making urgent sounds, almost like it was trying to explain something. Then the cub did something remarkable. It ran back to, pressing against him affectionately, then returned to the adults. It repeated this action twice more, as if trying to show the adults that was safe, that he was friend, not threat. The largest adult tilted its massive head, considering. Its patterns shifted to a color hadn't seen before, a deep orange mixed with yellow. The creature took another step forward. "Get back," said, his weapon trained on the approaching predator. "No," said. He stepped forward to meet the creature, leaving the relative safety of his team. Behind him, he heard Hay gasp, but no one tried to stop him. The adult was even more intimidating up close. Its scales were battle-scarred, evidence of a long life surviving on a dangerous world. Its claws could tear through metal. Its teeth could crush bone. Every instinct had screamed at him to run. Instead, he knelt down, making himself small and vulnerable. He extended his hand, palm down, fingers relaxed. The same gesture that had first connected him with the cub now offered to something far more dangerous. The adult studied his hand, studied his face. Its patterns flickered through several colors, what imagined might be surprise or curiosity. Then, moving with surprising gentleness for something so large, it leaned forward. Its nose touched his hand. Its breath was hot and carried the scent of meat and alien vegetation. For an endless moment, nothing happened. Then the creature pressed its massive head against its palm, just as the cub had done months ago in the containment chamber. The same gesture of trust, the same request for affection. His hand trembled as he began to scratch behind the equivalent of the creature's ears. The adult's eyes half closed. A sound emerged from its chest, deeper and more resonant than the cub's purring, but unmistakably the same expression of contentment. Behind, Wu was crying, had her recording equipment focused on the scene, hands shaking. Hay stood frozen, barely breathing. Even had lowered his weapon, his usually stern expression replaced by something like awe. The other two adults approached now, less cautious than before. They sniffed at the research team, their patterns bright with curiosity rather than aggression. The cub ran between everyone, ecstatic, making sounds that could only be described as joyful. "They're not aggressive at all," Hay whispered. "They were defending their territory and their young, but they're not inherently violent." "Just like humans," said, still scratching the massive head pressing against his hand. "We'll fight to protect our families, but given the choice, we'd rather be peaceful." They spent 3 hours in that clearing, humans and apex creatures sharing space peacefully. The adults allowed the researchers to examine them from a distance, observing their behaviors and social interactions. The cub stayed close to, but clearly belonged with its family now, diving in and out of the burrows the adults had made, playing with its siblings who emerged from the forest. When it was time to leave, the cub seemed torn. It looked at its family, then back again, knelt down one more time and wrapped his arms around the creature's neck. "You need to stay here," he said softly. "This is your home, these are your people, but I'll come back to visit, I promise." The cub made a sad sound, pressing closer. Then, as if understanding, it licked its face with its rough tongue and bounded back to its family. The largest adult, the one that had first accepted its touch, watched him with what might have been gratitude in its eyes. As the research team boarded their ship, the family watched from the clearing. Just before the ramp closed, saw the cub's bioluminescent patterns flash in a specific sequence, one he had seen many times during their months together. He liked to think it meant thank you. The journey back to the station took 2 days. During that time, compiled his observations and methodologies into a comprehensive report. Hay worked with him, adding scientific documentation and analysis. Wu contributed medical data showing how stress reduction improved health outcomes across multiple species, wrote about her own successes applying these methods to other difficult specimens. When they arrived back at the station, they found it transformed. Word of their success had spread throughout the coalition. Research facilities across known space were requesting human consultants. Universities wanted to establish new programs in human-style xenobiology. Even Admiral had sent a message, requesting that help train coalition personnel in these new communication methods. Hay called a team meeting in her office. The coalition is forming a new initiative, the Interspecies Communication Program. They want humans to lead it because apparently we have a gift for this that other species don't naturally possess. She looked at. They want you to head the program. Was quiet for a moment, thinking about the cub, about all the other creatures suffering because no one knew how to reach them, about all the potential conflicts that could be avoided if species learned to understand each other better. I'll do it, he said, but not alone. I want Wu as chief medical officer, as head of training, and I want Hay as scientific director. What about me? Asked with what might have been amusement. Someone needs to keep us safe when we're trying to hug things that could eat us, said with a smile. Head of security, obviously. 6 months later, a coalition vessel made contact with a previously unknown species near the edge of explored space. The aliens were heavily armed, suspicious, and on the verge of attacking what they perceived as an invasion of their territory. The situation was critical, moments away from becoming the first major conflict in decades. The coalition captain sent an urgent message to the Interspecies Communication Program. A young woman named Day arrived on the bridge within minutes. She was a recent graduate of training program, barely 23 years old, but she carried herself with quiet confidence. She had learned from the best. Let me talk to them, Day said. The captain hesitated, then nodded. What did they have to lose? Day positioned herself in front of the communication screen where the alien delegation could see her. She sat down slowly, cross-legged, making herself small and non-threatening. The aliens watched suspiciously, their weapons still raised. For several minutes, Day simply sat there, breathing calmly, her posture open and relaxed. The aliens looked at each other, confused by this unusual response. One of them, clearly a leader, said something in their language. Day didn't understand the words, but she understood tone. She extended her hand slowly, palm down, the universal human gesture of peaceful intent. The same gesture had used with the cub, the same gesture that had changed everything. The alien leader studied her hand, studied her face. Then, cautiously, it reached out with its own appendage and touched her palm. The tension broke. Weapons were lowered. A conversation began, slow and halting at first, using translators and patience and the willingness to understand. Within hours, what could have been a war became instead the foundation of a new alliance. Back on the research station, received the report of Day's success. He smiled, thinking of the cub purring in that containment chamber, of the massive adult pressing its head against his hand, of all the impossible connections that became possible when someone simply took the time to understand. Hay found him staring out at the stars, proud of your student. Very, said, but I'm more proud of what this represents. We're not just studying aliens anymore. We're learning to be part of a real galactic community, one built on understanding rather than fear. Because humans have a gift for empathy, Hay said. Because humans remember what it's like to be afraid and alone, corrected gently. We remember what it means to be misunderstood, and that memory makes us try harder to understand others. Outside the station, ships from 100 worlds came and went, carrying human consultants to first contact situations, medical emergencies, and diplomatic missions. The galaxy had learned what humans could offer, and they were in high demand. But knew the real gift wasn't some special human ability. It was something much simpler and more profound. It was the willingness to sit down with a terrified creature and say, "I see you. I understand. You are not alone." Sometimes that was all anyone needed to hear, whether they walked on 2 legs, 6, or something else entirely. And somewhere on Prime, a young predator curled up with its family, healthy and happy, its bioluminescent patterns glowing with peaceful dreams. In those dreams, it sometimes remembered gentle hands and a soft voice humming in the darkness, and it purred.